This sunburst mirror here was actually the first project I ever shared on my YouTube channel. This is my first ever DIY project that I created, and I really think it's still really cute, honestly. So I started off with an 8-inch round mirror, and I used 2 different sizes of popsicle sticks. I used these longer, kind of skinnier ones, and then I also used your traditional ones as well. The first thing that I did was I went around the bottom lip or bottom edge of our piece with the longer, skinnier popsicle sticks and hot glued them into place where I wanted them to go. And once you have them all glued down, it's gonna look something like this. But as you can see, it just kind of seems a little bit boring. So in between each of the popsicle sticks, I actually glued a vertical popsicle stick, so it was kind of sticking upwards, which just adds dimension to the piece. I feel like every one of these voiceovers, I'm like, it adds dimension, it adds texture, but it really does. Like, I think this adds a nice bit of visual detail. So I went ahead and I added a vertical popsicle stick just glued in between all of our longer sticks. This also kind of gives a height variance. So as you can see, the first layer of sticks is a bit longer than the second layer, which I love. And then on the back side, I just glued down a little ring of macrame cording to hang it up on the wall, and that finishes off your new sunburst mirror. Creating a concrete coaster set is actually extremely affordable and not as hard as it looks. All you're going to need is a couple of solo cups, some concrete mix, some water, and a hot glue gun. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is actually cutting the top rims off of our solo cups and creating our very own mold. And I'm going to be gluing down the top of our solo cups to the notebook cover there. So we're basically creating our very own mold. So next what I wanted to do was mix up the concrete and pour it into the mold that we created. So you're just going to tap that in, making sure that you added enough hot glue around the perimeter of your mold to where the concrete will not seep out at all. Let that cure overnight, and once it is fully cured, you could basically demold your new set of coasters by pulling off that notebook cover, and this is what they end up looking like. You could sand the edges with a nail file or a little bit of sandpaper to give them a nice finish, and that's the finished project. Next up, we're going to be making this DIY macrame, really cute kind of like lantern candle holder. So I'm going to be using a mason jar along with some hemp cording. And the first thing that I'm going to be doing is measuring out about 2-yard sections of my hemp cording. And you're going to need, I believe, 6 pieces in the end, 6 or 8. So what I'm going to be doing is starting out by gluing down my pieces in the center here. So I actually did end up using 8 strands. And you're going to want to glue them so that you have all evenly placed out 8 sections on the bottom of your mason jar. And then I added a little bit of hot glue to hold them into place as I started the macrame process. But this is just, again, a very repetitive process like a couple of the earlier projects. We are creating a collection of square knots where we grab the neighboring strand and we connect it to a knot that was neighboring it as well. And you're just going to be repeating this process until you reach the top rim of the jar. So I just kind of work in a circle and create a knot, as you can see here, twist it, move on to our next side, create a knot, twist it, move on to our next side, create a knot. And as you keep creating these knots, it's going to get tighter and tighter up towards the top, which is what you're going to want so that it kind of forms around your mason jar shape. So as you can see here, getting closer to the top here, it really creates a nice nautical vibe. It almost gives like a fishnet look to the piece, and this is what it ended up looking like in the end. You can tie off your strands, you can turn it into a hanging planter if you want to and leave them long, or glue them as I did and just pop a candle inside as a candle holder. Cork is another really fun material to work with, and it's also super affordable. I got these cork sheets at the dollar store, and I wanted to turn them into some geometric wall decals, which you can just use as wall decals if you'd like to, but you can also actually pin things into them and use them as kind of like a little pegboard. So the first thing that I did was I just created triangle shapes out of the square shape, and I highly suggest using an X-Acto knife for cutting cork. It is so simple and easy. All you have to do is just kind of create a couple of strokes across using a ruler, and the cork will cut nice and smoothly. So I went ahead and I created these. I also went ahead and created some smaller ones as well, just using 1/4 of the cube. And in the end, I had all these different triangle shapes, which I could then go in and add a little bit of painted detail to. So using a little bit of Scotch tape, I just applied that on the edge there. And this one in particular, I wanted to have a nice little white edge. So I went ahead and I added some white acrylic paint on there. I also painted some fully white as well. And once you're done, you can pull off your acrylic paint and you can just attach these to the wall using some 3M mounting squares, and that finishes off this project. Another super affordable wall decor piece is a pressed flower wall art, and you can make this on a canvas, you could put it inside of a shadow box frame, whatever you want to do, but all you're really going to need is a couple of florals and leaves that you could find out in the garden or on a walk down the street. So as you can see here, I just picked up a random variety of different flowers and leaves, and we're going to be using a bit of parchment paper to press these in between some heavy objects. So the first thing that I did was actually rip off a piece of parchment paper, place another piece on top, and on top of that I placed a ton of my books from school, or when I was going to school, on top of that. And you're going to want to let this dry for about 2 to 3 full days, or until all the water has been drawn out of the pieces and they are completely dry and flattened, ready for the next step of the process. So as you can see here, I have all these flattened leaves and flowers. And lastly, the next step in the process is just to glue these down to a canvas or some form of frame. So I ended up lining them up. I just thought it added a nice minimal approach to this piece, but you can scatter them around, create patterns, however you want to do it. But in the end, you come up with this really cute dried floral wall decor piece. Whenever I create these IKEA rugs here on the channel, you guys always love them so much, and this is going to be one of the designs that I've done. I believe I've done about 3 to 4 of them, but I'm using the Lowhouse rug, which is basically a jute knotted rug from IKEA, and I'm also going to be using some masking tape to mask off any sections that I want to apply the spray paint to. So as you can see here, I applied 2 borders that ran horizontally, and then I applied a ton of vertical strips, and each one of these vertical strips took up about 2 different knots. So I kind of used my knots as measurement, and my masking tape that I used, which I believe was about 1 inch wide, ended up covering 2 full knots, so I was able to kind of measure out as I went, and then I went ahead and applied on my paint here. So I'm just using a regular white acrylic paint. Now, since I've actually created a couple of these rugs since this project was created, I highly suggest using spray paint as opposed to just acrylic paint. Honestly, it is so much easier. You can just spray right over the top of your masked area, wait for it to dry, peel it off. I also feel like the paint goes on so much more opaque as well, and if you do this process, you could apply a clear coat on top to lock it in. Next up, we are creating a set of felt coasters, which are really cute, and I actually upcycled this Putta box from IKEA. I had this in my stash for a while, and I just never ended up using it for any form of storage, so I was like, why don't I go ahead and actually recycle it and turn it into some coasters and just use the fabric, because I didn't find a use for the actual box itself. So all I had to do for this process was honestly use a ramekin. I traced around the outside of the ramekin to create my coaster size, but you can use whatever you have kind of as a marking utensil, and then I went back in with a pair of scissors and just trimmed around all of the excess, and that honestly, you guys, finishes off this project. It was super simple and easy. I just felt like the material on this was super thick and very durable, so I thought it'd be great for a set of coasters. I also intentionally drew right over the top of the stitching line because I love the detail I added, and I just locked in those seams with a little bit of glue on the edge, and that finished off this coaster set. This project here, you guys, really takes me back because this was such an old DIY that I created, but honestly, it's still such a cute concept, and you can totally use this on really anything that is glass and kind of create a frosted glass look. So the first thing that I actually did was just grab some regular old printer paper, and I'm going to be cutting out some triangle shapes, which are going to be our masks. So I cut a 2-inch wide strip of paper, and from that paper, I went ahead and freehand cut a couple of triangles. I just like the organic shape of a freehand cut triangle as opposed to measuring them all out. I think it kind of adds a little bit more of a boho element to this piece, and I went ahead and I actually adhered these down with just some water-based glue, just an Elmer's glue stick, because it's super easy to remove from glass. It's kind of just a temporary fixation at the moment. And then what I went ahead and did was actually spray on top of it a coat of sea glass spray paint, and as you can see, when you go ahead and remove those masked triangle sections, it reveals the shiny clean glass underneath, and you have a frosted glass over top, which overall gives you this kind of nice embossed etched look. I always actually get requested for a ton of decor that includes like an initial or something that you can customize a little bit, and I love this take on an initial decor piece. I think this would be so cute in an office space. So I actually picked up one of these oversized paper mache letters, which I believe I got it at Michael's, and I also got these kind of balsa wood stick sections, which I'm going to then be tiling on the front of our letter to almost give it a restored wood look, as opposed to making it look paper mache or just painting it or adding to it. I thought the wood really elevated the overall vibe, and it was still a very affordable option. So all you have to do is actually just place the wood on the front side, flip it over to the back side, and use a pen to just kind of mark off the section you want to cut, and use a pair of scissors to simply cut away any excess. And do keep in mind in the end that you can go back in with a little bit of sandpaper if you need to sand away any harsh edges, but once you are done, you kind of get this tiled wood effect that I think looks so stunning in any space. For our next project, I really wanted to create a functional DIY with supplies that I already had in my stash, so I ended up opting for using a coat hanger from IKEA, one of the wooden ones, and some thick gauge brass aluminum wire. Now this wire is super easy to bend, so all that I had to do to start was just kind of wrap it around very haphazardly. There is no rhyme or reason to this at all, and as you want to add a hook to your piece, all you're going to do is kind of create a stick section that comes off of your coat hanger, as you can see here. I bent it in half at the end and then brought it back up to the start where I'm able to then continue down the length of my coat hanger. So as you're wrapping this around your coat hanger, I just did it very organically. There was no rhyme or reason to this in any way, and as I wanted to add a hook again, I went ahead, I created my hook section by bending the wire in half, bringing it back up to create a little hook shape, and then I went ahead and I sprayed the top with a little bit of brass spray paint, and that finished off this project.